The Pacific Ocean, early dawn, 1942. The horizon glows faintly under a rising red sun, its reflection trembling across miles of steel-gray water. A single ship cuts through the mist, engines humming with a steady, unbroken rhythm. Her deck crew moves like clockwork, men in oil-stained coveralls securing bomb racks, fueling aircraft, eyes half-closed from sleepless nights. Overhead, the first Wildcat fighters idle, propellers flashing in the dim light. Below deck, radar operators watch green lines sweep across dark screens. Ghosts in motion. Somewhere deep inside the ship, the chaplain whispers a prayer no one can hear. Every man aboard knows what's coming. They've seen carriers burn. They've watched comrades vanish into the sea. Yet here they are again, armed and ready. A voice crackles over the loudspeaker. Calm, clipped, American. Stand by for flight operations. The massive vessel turns into the wind, her bow rising against the morning waves. Her name will soon echo across oceans. Feared in Tokyo and revered in Washington, USS Enterprise. In December 1941, the United States Navy awoke to smoke, fire, and disbelief. Pearl Harbor, once the symbol of Pacific security, was a graveyard of twisted metal and burning oil. Battleships that had taken decades to build sank in minutes. The Pacific Fleet, America's shield, was crippled before the war had even truly begun. But not every ship was there that morning. 3 U.S. aircraft carriers, Lexington, Saratoga, and Enterprise, were out at sea on routine missions. By sheer chance, they survived. That accident of timing would become the hinge upon which the Pacific War would turn. The Enterprise, commissioned in 1938, was part of the Yorktown class, a trio of fast, modern carriers built in a time when the world still believed battleships ruled the seas. At 827 feet long, with a displacement of nearly 20,000 tons, she was designed for speed, endurance, and the brutal rhythm of carrier warfare that no one yet understood. When the smoke cleared at Pearl Harbor, Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey's Task Force 16, built around the Enterprise, was already at sea. Halsey's anger mirrored that of his men. He knew the rules of naval warfare had just been rewritten. "Before we're through with them," he swore, "the Japanese language will be spoken only in hell." The early months of 1942 were chaos. The Imperial Japanese Navy surged across the Pacific like a tide, seizing Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, and vast stretches of the Dutch East Indies. American defenses were scattered, morale shaken. For every Japanese victory, Enterprise was somewhere in the shadows, scouting, striking, and surviving. In February, she launched air raids on the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, the first American counterblows of the war. It wasn't about territory or decisive damage yet. It was about psychology, showing the enemy that the United States still had claws. The missions were brutal. Pilots returned with empty fuel tanks, bullet holes across their wings, and eyes hollow from exhaustion. But word spread fast through the fleet. Enterprise was fighting back. She became a moving symbol, a gray ghost of retribution in the Pacific. Crews whispered her name with pride. Japanese reconnaissance began calling her the ghost ship, because time and again, reports claimed she'd been sunk. Yet she always returned to battle. Behind the steel and machinery was a heartbeat. Life aboard was a blend of monotony and terror. Heat radiated off the flight deck. Food was rationed. Sleep was scarce. Every clang of a wrench or buzz of the loudspeaker could mean another attack. Still, discipline held. The men of Enterprise became a brotherhood forged by salt and fear. The Navy's High Command, led by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, began to understand something profound: that the age of the battleship was over. The carrier was now the weapon of decision, and Enterprise was proving it every day. Her flight deck became the launching point for America's counterpunch. her pilots the tip of a new kind of spear. By March 1942, the Enterprise was no longer just another ship. She was the embodiment of American resolve, a floating fortress that would face the storm ahead with defiance and skill. The tide of war was still against the Allies. Singapore had fallen. The Philippines were collapsing. The Japanese advance seemed unstoppable. But somewhere in that vast ocean, the Enterprise steamed into the wind, preparing for the next mission. One that would strike deeper into enemy territory than any American force had dared to go. And soon, her name would be tied to one of the boldest operations in U.S. military history, the Doolittle Raid. April 1942, 4 months after Pearl Harbor. America was still reeling, its naval strength stretched thin across thousands of miles of ocean. Yet something audacious was in motion, an idea as improbable as it was symbolic. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, an Army Air Corps pilot and engineer, had proposed launching land-based bombers from an aircraft carrier to strike the Japanese homeland itself. It was daring, dangerous, and, if successful, a psychological thunderbolt. Only one ship could make it possible: USS Enterprise. Under the command of Vice Admiral William F. Halsey, Task Force 16, built around Enterprise and Hornet, steamed west across the Pacific in total secrecy. On Hornet's deck sat 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, each too large for carrier operations. Enterprise's role was protection, her fighters guarding the fleet against air and submarine threats as they closed in on Japan. On April 18, 1942, the mission launched earlier than planned. Discovered by Japanese patrol vessels, Halsey gave the order: "Launch the bombers." One by one, the Army pilots roared off the deck into a cold gray wind, bound for Tokyo, Nagoya, and Yokohama. The Doolittle Raid caused minimal physical damage, but its psychological shock was enormous. For the first time, the Japanese mainland had been struck. For the first time, civilians in Tokyo looked skyward and saw American aircraft. And for the men of Enterprise, it proved something even greater: that audacity, precision, and mobility could change the war's tempo. In the months that followed, Enterprise became the backbone of the U.S. Navy's carrier forces. When Lexington was lost at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, and Yorktown nearly destroyed at Midway, the number of operational carriers dwindled. Each surviving ship became priceless. By June 1942, intelligence breakthroughs from American cryptographers had given Admiral Nimitz a rare gift: foreknowledge. Japan's next major operation, aimed at capturing Midway Atoll, would try to lure and destroy what remained of the U.S. carriers. Nimitz couldn't afford to lose. 2 task forces were assembled. Task Force 16, commanded by Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, centered on Enterprise and Hornet. Task Force 17, built around the battered but repaired Yorktown, under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Together, these 3 carriers represented the sum total of America's offensive power in the Pacific. As the Japanese First Air Fleet, 4 massive carriers under Admiral Chuichi Nagamo advanced toward Midway. The men aboard Enterprise prepared for a fight that would decide the fate of the Pacific. Mechanics checked engines through sleepless nights. Pilots memorized maps of open ocean and coral reefs. Below deck, cooks served what might be their last hot meal before battle. The Pacific Air War was evolving fast. Gone were the static duels of battleships. Now the sea was an invisible chessboard of scouting planes, radio silence, and sudden death from hundreds of miles away. Whoever found the enemy first, struck first, would win. When dawn broke on June 4th, Enterprise's air group roared into the sky, their course leading toward destiny. The following hours would see chaos, courage, and the destruction of the Japanese carrier force. But that story, the moment when Enterprise's dive bombers changed the course of the entire war, would come later. For now, as the Pacific sun rose over the horizon, the men of Enterprise could feel the gravity of the moment. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outexperienced. Yet the steel beneath their feet carried something the enemy could never calculate: resolve. The ship that had escaped Pearl Harbor, led the first counterstrikes, and protected Doolittle's bombers, was now sailing into the most decisive battle of the Pacific. And by the time it was over, the world would call her something new: the most dangerous ship afloat. The technological angle, when USS Enterprise slid down the ways at Newport News Shipbuilding in 1936, few could imagine she'd become a legend. She was the 7th American ship to bear that proud name. But this one was unlike any before. A sleek steel predator designed for a new age of warfare. At 25 knots, she could outrun most cruisers. Her 9 boilers and 4 geared turbines drove more than 120,000 horsepower, pushing a vessel longer than 8 city blocks. Her flight deck stretched like an armored runway over the Pacific, 862 feet of gray steel and purpose. Beneath it, hangars buzzed with aircraft elevators rising and falling like mechanical lungs. The Yorktown-class carriers were the Navy's experiment in marrying speed with striking power. They carried roughly 90 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes, each one capable of projecting destruction hundreds of miles from the ship itself. Where battleships fired shells, Enterprise hurled squadrons. Her island tower bristled with new technology. Early air search radar, the CXAM-1, scanned the sky in luminous green arcs, a marvel in 1941. Operators learned to read ghostly echoes as though they were second sight, detecting attackers long before human eyes could. By 1942, improved fire control radars guided her 5-inch anti-aircraft guns with growing precision. But her greatest weapon wasn't metal. It was adaptability. Between missions, she was constantly modified. Gun mounts increased from 8 to 40, later 60 Bofors and Oerlikons crowding her decks. Her flight crews evolved from pre-war peacetime aviators to hardened combat veterans, inventing carrier tactics on the fly. Every hit she took forced innovation. When a bomb tore through her flight deck off the Solomons, she was patched at sea with steel plating from destroyers' hulls. When torpedoes flooded compartments, engineers rewired pumps and jury-rigged bulkheads within hours. Each scar became part of her armor, each repair a new layer of knowledge. By late 1942, Enterprise was more than a warship. She was a floating laboratory, where the future of naval aviation was being written in oil, sweat, and blood. The human angle technology gave Enterprise her power. Men gave her a soul. Nearly 2,200 crew members lived within her gray walls. Pilots, mechanics, gunners, cooks, radio men, chaplains, doctors, and deckhands. Most were barely out of high school. Many had never seen the ocean before boarding her. Life aboard was an exercise in endurance. Temperatures below deck often exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The smell of fuel, sweat, and coffee mixed with the ozone tang of machinery. Sleep came in snatches. 4 hours here, 2 there, interrupted by alarms that could summon death from the sky at any moment. Yet routines persisted. Steel decks were scrubbed before dawn. Planes were serviced in rhythmic choreography. Fueling hoses, bomb hoists, engine checks, propellers spinning. Each man knew his place in the sequence. A single mistake, a forgotten pin, a spilled drop of gasoline could ignite catastrophe. During long patrols, boredom gnawed at the edges. Letters from home were rare, often censored or delayed. Some sailors carved model airplanes from scrap aluminum. Others listened to Glenn Miller records on tinny phonographs, trying to forget the horizon that never changed. And then, without warning, monotony turned to chaos. Sirens screamed, boots thundered across steel. Men raced to battle stations, adrenaline wiping away exhaustion. The sky would fill with black bursts of flak, the deck trembling under bomb blasts. Fear was constant, but so was trust. Each sailor's survival depended entirely on the man beside him. Pilots of the Enterprise Air Group lived by odds thinner than paper. Takeoff from the deck meant commitment. There was no second chance. In the air they faced Japanese Zeros, faster and more agile. Many never returned. Their bunks stayed made, untouched, until replacements arrived. One pilot wrote in his diary after Midway, "We didn't think about being heroes. We just didn't want to let the ship down." That sense of shared identity, of the ship as a living being, ran deep. Crewmen called her the Big E, a nickname spoken with affection and reverence. When word spread through the fleet that Enterprise had been hit, sailors on other ships would lower their heads in silence. When she returned, patched and battle-ready again, cheers echoed across entire harbors. For the men aboard, she wasn't just a warship, she was home, guardian, and avenger. The steel embodiment of every friend they'd lost since Pearl Harbor. And as 1942 turned toward its second half, that bond between machine and man would be tested beyond anything they had yet endured. The Pacific was preparing to erupt again, and Enterprise would be at its center. The leadership angle every great warship carries the imprint of the men who command her. For Enterprise, those men were among the most remarkable leaders the U.S. Navy ever produced. Calm under fire, ruthless in strategy, and utterly devoted to their crew. At her helm, through the most critical months, stood Vice Admiral William Bull Halsey, a sailor of volcanic energy. His leadership style was simple: attack, attack, and attack again. Halsey's faith in Enterprise was unshakable. He treated her like a living warrior, a weapon too fierce to fall. His famous battle order became her creed: hit hard, hit fast, hit often. When illness forced Halsey ashore in 1942, command of Task Force 16 passed to Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, a quiet intellectual, deliberate and analytical. Where Halsey was thunder, Spruance was precision. His calmness in chaos became the soul of the Midway operation. Pilots later recalled his ability to issue life-and-death orders in a voice barely above a whisper. Supporting them were the captains who lived with the ship daily. Men like Captain George D. Murray and Captain Arthur C. Davis, who guided Enterprise through minefields of flame, torpedoes, and exhaustion. Their decisions, made in seconds, often determined whether the ship lived or died. Leadership aboard Enterprise was not about heroics. It was about responsibility. Every man knew that hesitation could cost hundreds of lives. Officers ate the same rations as enlisted men. Halsey's phrase, "There are no great men, only great teams," was proven daily on her decks. Through Halsey's aggression, Spruance's intellect, and Nimitz's strategic patience, Enterprise became the ideal weapon, guided by brains as sharp as her steel. The enemy's perspective in Tokyo, the name USS Enterprise became a curse. Japanese intelligence first noted her after the early Marshall Islands raids. At first, reports dismissed her as one of several surviving American carriers. But as the months passed, one name appeared again and again in after-action reports, radio intercepts, and reconnaissance photos, CV-6. To Japanese naval officers, Enterprise was elusive, appearing in one sector, vanishing, then striking somewhere else entirely. After Midway, she gained a new title among enemy analysts, the Gray Ghost. By late 1942, Japanese pilots were actively hunting her. Propaganda broadcasts frequently claimed she'd been sunk. One report after the Battle of Santa Cruz declared triumphantly, "The Enterprise has gone to the bottom." Yet weeks later, She reappeared off the Solomons, launching fresh waves of aircraft. That psychological weight was enormous. Japan's naval command began to view her as a phantom, a ship that defied logic and fate. To sink her became an obsession. Entire squadrons were redirected to find her. Suicide pilots were later trained with her silhouette on target boards. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, once reportedly remarked that the Americans had a ship which carries luck in her smoke. Whether or not he said it, his subordinates believed it. The Enterprise's survival through repeated bombings, torpedoes, and kamikaze strikes bordered on mythic. In a war fought by machines, she became a legend. The ship Japan couldn't kill. The moral and emotional angle war is measured not just in victories and losses, but in what it does to those who endure it. For the crew of Enterprise, survival carried its own weight. Each return from battle meant counting the missing. Sometimes they'd gather in the hangar bay, standing silently as the chaplain read names over the loudspeakers, pilots who'd taken off but never returned. The sound of the ocean through the open hangar doors was their only response. There was pride, yes, immense pride, but also fatigue. The endless deployments blurred months into years. Sailors marked time not by calendar dates, but by battles. Midway, Guadalcanal, Santa Cruz, the Gilberts. Home felt like another lifetime. Morality aboard the Enterprise was simple. Fight to survive, protect your shipmates, complete the mission. Yet under that clarity lay a haunting truth. Each success meant hundreds of young Japanese sailors dying beneath their bombs. The enemy had faces, too. Pilots sometimes returned from missions pale and wordless, having seen men leap from burning decks into the sea. Still, there was no room for hesitation. "We didn't start this war," one gunner later said, "but we damn sure had to finish it." The ship's chaplains worked tirelessly, holding services under dim lights, the roar of engines vibrating through the walls. Bibles sat beside machine guns. Prayer shared space with firepower. In letters home, sailors wrote of sunsets over the Pacific. Beautiful, terrible, endless, and of a strange peace that came when the guns finally went silent, if only for a night. Enterprise's crew learned a truth as old as war itself. Courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And that courage would be tested beyond imagination in the months ahead. As the ship sailed into the battles that would define not only her legend, but the fate of the entire Pacific. June 4, 1942. The sun rose over a calm Pacific, the sky streaked with pale gold. On the horizon, a storm of steel was brewing, unseen but inevitable. Somewhere beyond that curve of ocean, 4 of Japan's most powerful carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were closing in on Midway Atoll. Their mission: destroy the last of America's carriers and secure the Pacific forever. On board USS Enterprise, every man knew what was at stake. This was not another raid or ambush. This was a reckoning. At 04:30 hours, flight crews began preparing aircraft on the deck. The smell of aviation fuel filled the air, mingling with salt and sweat. Admiral Raymond Spruance stood on the bridge, calm as ever, his binoculars fixed on the eastern horizon. His orders were simple: strike first. At 0700, Enterprise launched her first wave. 37 dauntless dive bombers under Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, escorted by Wildcat fighters. They climbed into a perfect blue sky, banking east toward where Japanese carriers were believed to be. But navigation in 1942 was an art of faith. No GPS, no radar guidance. Only the sun, the compass, and instinct. Hours passed. Fuel ran low. Some pilots considered turning back. Then McCluskey spotted something. A single Japanese destroyer, Arashi, racing north at full speed. Instead of returning home, he made a split-second decision to follow it. The destroyer, he reasoned, must be rejoining the main fleet after attacking an American submarine. That instinct would change history. Minutes later, the Pacific opened before him. A sight burned into memory. 4 Japanese carriers arrayed in perfect formation. Flight decks crowded with refueling and rearming aircraft. They were completely exposed. McCluskey's voice came over the radio. "Enemy fleet sighted. Commence attack." At 10:20 hours, Enterprise's bombers dove from the sun. The ocean seemed to tilt upward as the planes screamed down at near vertical angles, sirens howling. Anti-aircraft bursts filled the sky. Black puffs. Tracers. Chaos. Lieutenant Richard Best, leading Bombing Squadron 6, aimed for the Kaga. He released his bomb at 2,500 feet. It struck amidships, igniting aviation fuel and setting off a chain of explosions. A second bomb hit forward. Within minutes, Kaga was a floating inferno. Moments later, other Enterprise bombers found Akagi. A single 1,000-pound bomb hit near her aft elevator, detonating torpedoes and fuel lines. The blast ripped through her decks, a catastrophic wound from which she would never recover. 2 Japanese carriers were mortally wounded in less than 6 minutes. The sky erupted into chaos. Burning aircraft, falling debris, men bailing out into the ocean. Enterprise's pilots, exhausted and low on fuel, turned back toward their ship through curtains of smoke. By the end of that morning, the Imperial Japanese Navy, once thought invincible, was reeling. The precision, bravery, and sheer luck of Enterprise's air group had shattered its offensive power. But the battle was not yet over. The surviving Japanese carrier Hiryu counterattacked within hours, launching bombers that located Yorktown and hit her with devastating accuracy. By afternoon, Yorktown lay crippled, flames licking her sides. The balance hung by a thread. Spruance and the Enterprise's crew knew what had to be done. They launched again. A second strike aimed to finish the job. Late that afternoon, Enterprise's dive bombers found Hiryu. 4 direct hits turned her into an inferno. She sank before nightfall. When darkness fell on June 4, 1942, only one of Japan's 4 carriers remained afloat, and she too would slip beneath the waves before dawn. The cost had been heavy. Dozens of Enterprise pilots were missing. Some had ditched at sea. Others had vanished entirely. But the impossible had been achieved. 4 Japanese carriers destroyed. The core of the Imperial Navy broken. As the ship's deck lights flickered on that night, the men stood silently, staring across the black ocean. They didn't cheer. They were too exhausted, too aware of how narrowly they'd survived. One sailor later wrote, "It wasn't victory we felt. It was disbelief and relief that we'd lived to see another sunrise." The Battle of Midway was over. The Pacific War had turned, but for Enterprise, the war was far from done. Ahead lay the bloodiest campaign of all, the long, grinding fight for the Solomon Islands. And there, the Gray Ghost would face her deadliest trials yet. The victory at Midway was decisive, but not final. The Japanese Empire still held vast territory, and its fleets remained formidable. The next struggle would not be fought in open ocean, but in the shadow of a small, jungle-covered island called Guadalcanal, August 1942. The first major American offensive of the war began. U.S. Marines stormed the beaches, seizing a half-finished Japanese airstrip that would soon be known as Henderson Field. To hold it, they would need constant air support, and that meant Enterprise would once again be on the front line. For the next 6 months, the waters around the Solomons became a killing ground. Both sides threw everything they had into the fight: aircraft, destroyers, cruisers, Even transports pressed into battle. The nights glowed red from tracer fire. The days were filled with the drone of engines and the shriek of dive bombers. On August 24, 1942, the Enterprise led Task Force 16 into the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. Early that afternoon, radar detected incoming aircraft, a massive Japanese strike force. The ship's klaxon wailed through the corridors. "Air attack imminent!" Within minutes, the sky darkened with enemy bombers. The first wave dived steeply from 12,000 feet. Enterprise's gunners opened up with everything: 5-inch guns, 20mm Oerlikons, and Bofors cannons that rattled the deck like thunder. One Val dive bomber scored a direct hit near the forward elevator, blowing men off their feet. Another bomb pierced the flight deck, detonating below and setting the hangar ablaze. Damage parties raced through smoke and fire, dragging hoses across molten steel. Pilots still on deck shoved burning aircraft overboard to prevent explosions. A third bomb smashed through her deck, killing dozens. For nearly an hour, the Enterprise burned. But she didn't die. By nightfall, her fires were under control. Flight operations partially restored. She limped away from the battle scarred but alive, her air groups having sunk a Japanese light carrier in return. Days later, as she entered Pearl Harbor for repairs, sailors on nearby ships lined their rails in silence. Some saluted. Others simply watched, awestruck that she was still afloat. It would not be the last time. By October 1942, she was back in the fight, barely 2 months after being hit. Her next trial came in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. It was one of the most brutal carrier duels of the entire war. Once again, Enterprise faced relentless waves of Japanese aircraft. Her gunners fought until their barrels glowed red. Bombs ripped through her decks. Torpedoes exploded dangerously close. The ship shook with each impact, bulkheads groaning under stress. One sailor described it as being inside a drum while someone beat it with hammers of fire. Captain Osborne Hardison, commanding the ship during Santa Cruz, refused to retreat. "We'll fight her till she sinks," he told the bridge crew. She didn't sink. By the end of the battle, Enterprise was the only operational American carrier left in the Pacific. Hornet had been sunk. Saratoga and Wasp were in dry dock. The entire Pacific War now balanced on a single deck of battered steel. The Big E. The men understood what that meant. There was no backup, no replacement. They fought, repaired, and fought again, often within the same day. Sailors slept beside unexploded bombs. Engineers worked knee-deep in seawater to patch holes while the ship was still under attack. At one point, during an air raid, a bomb struck just aft of the island superstructure. The blast killed dozens and sent shrapnel through command stations. Smoke blanketed the bridge. Over the intercom came a calm voice, the ship's executive officer. "We're still afloat. Keep firing." They did. For every hit she took, Enterprise gave more back. Her aircraft mauled Japanese convoys, destroyed enemy cruisers, and defended the Marines clinging to Henderson Field. She became both shield and sword, the guardian of Guadalcanal. By December 1942, she had been bombed, torpedoed, strafed, and nearly broken, yet remained at sea. She was patched at Espiritu Santo, repaired by crews who worked around the clock under lantern light, then sent straight back into combat. News of her endurance spread like wildfire through both navies. To the Japanese, she was a ghost. To the Americans, she was a miracle. And when word reached Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself sent a message to her crew. "Enterprise has become the most glorious ship in our Navy. Her name will be remembered so long as our people live." By early 1943, the Solomons campaign had turned. The Japanese were retreating. The Enterprise, scarred and weary, had done the impossible, holding the line when the Pacific Fleet had been reduced to a single fighting carrier. She had defied bombs, torpedoes, and logic itself. She had earned her title, the most dangerous warship of World War II. The year was 1943. The tide of war was slowly, painfully turning. Japan's once dominant fleet was fractured, its carriers crippled, its air wings decimated. But the Pacific was far from safe. And the Enterprise, though battered, was far from finished. After months of hasty repairs, she emerged from Pearl Harbor like a scarred veteran returning to the front. New steel plates lined her hull, patched where bombs had once torn her open. Her decks bore the marks of fire and shrapnel. Her hangars still smelled faintly of smoke and oil. But her crew, many of them survivors from Midway and Santa Cruz, returned to her with fierce pride. By now, she was legendary. Sailors called her the Iron Phoenix, because no matter how many times she was struck down, she rose again. In November 1943, Enterprise joined the assault on the Gilbert Islands, supporting the bloody landings at Tarawa. From dawn to dusk, her aircraft launched continuous strikes, softening Japanese defenses and flying cover for Marines trapped on the beaches. Pilots returned with bullet holes in their wings, sometimes landing on fire. Flight crews risked their lives dragging burning aircraft to the edge, pushing them into the sea before they could explode. The tempo was relentless, yet the rhythm of war had become second nature to them. From Tarawa, she moved on to Kwajalein, Truk, and Saipan, operations that brought American forces ever closer to Japan's inner defenses. Each campaign bore the stamp of Enterprise's wings. Hellcats, Dauntlesses, and Avengers roaring into battle, striking enemy fleets, ports, and fortifications with precision and fury. At Truk Lagoon in February 1944, the so-called Japanese Pearl Harbor, Enterprise played a key role in Operation Hailstone. It was a day-long assault that crippled Japan's Central Pacific bastion. Her aircraft sank or damaged over 40 ships and destroyed hundreds of planes on the ground. That same year, she supported the invasions of the Marianas, the Philippines, and Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. By then, she was operating alongside a new generation of carriers: Essex, Lexington, Bunker Hill, but none carried her aura. Her presence at the heart of every fleet was more than tactical. It was psychological. Commanders requested to have Enterprise in their task force, a superstition that her luck, her endurance, somehow protected the men around her. In reality, it wasn't luck. It was her crew. By 1944, many had served aboard her for years. They'd watched friends die, endured constant battle fatigue, and still performed with surgical discipline. When bombs fell, they didn't flinch. When fires erupted, they ran toward them. The Enterprise had become less a ship than a living organism, a steel body powered by thousands of human hearts. As the Allies closed in on the Japanese home islands, she evolved again, this time into the Navy's first night carrier, equipped with radar-guided Hellcats and Avenger bombers. Under black Pacific skies, her squadrons hunted Japanese shipping and airfields in total darkness. It was a technological leap that extended the Navy's reach beyond daylight, and Enterprise led the way. But every hour at sea came at a cost. By late 1944, she'd been in combat almost continuously for 3 years, longer than any other carrier in the world. Her decks groaned, her engines wheezed, and her crew's faces showed the strain of endless war. Then came 1945, the final act. Okinawa, the largest amphibious invasion of the Pacific. The Japanese, desperate, unleashed waves of kamikaze pilots. The Enterprise was targeted again and again. She shot many down, but not all. On May 14, 1945, a kamikaze struck her flight deck just aft of the island. The explosion tore through the structure, killing 14 and wounding dozens. Fires swept across the deck. Ammunition cooked off, Smoke rose hundreds of feet into the sky. Once more, the Enterprise burned, and once more, she survived. Badly damaged, she was forced to withdraw. Her war was nearly over. In 3 years of constant combat, she had participated in more major engagements than any other warship in U.S. history. Her battle stars numbered 20. Her kill count, over 900 enemy aircraft, 70 ships, and countless ground targets. The Enterprise had become more than a ship. She was the embodiment of endurance, and as she steamed back toward Pearl Harbor one last time, her decks empty and her flags tattered, the men who served aboard her knew this was not the end, only the closing of a chapter written in fire and salt. By the end of 1945, the war in the Pacific had ended. Japan had surrendered. Cities lay in ruins, fleets were shattered, and the oceans were littered with the remnants of naval empires. Yet, USS Enterprise, battered, scarred, and aged beyond her years, remained afloat, a testament to endurance and resilience. After nearly 4 years of continuous combat, she returned to the United States. Her once pristine decks were pocked with shrapnel. Her hull bore the marks of torpedoes and bombs, and her superstructure was patched in dozens of places. Yet she sailed in triumph, her flag raised, carrying with her the stories of thousands of sailors who had lived, fought, and died aboard her. The Navy faced a difficult decision. New Essex-class carriers were coming into service, and the cost of maintaining an aging warship was immense. Despite her heroism, in February 1947, Enterprise was decommissioned. For more than a decade, she rested in mothballs at Bayonne, New Jersey, a silent witness to a war that had reshaped the world. Plans to preserve her as a museum were considered, but ultimately fell through. In 1958, the most decorated ship in U.S. naval history was sold for scrap. Steel that had survived torpedoes, bombs, and kamikazes was melted down, dispersed, and repurposed. Yet her legend endured. USS Enterprise earned 20 battle stars, more than any other American warship in World War II. She had participated in nearly every major Pacific engagement: the Doolittle Raid, Midway, Guadalcanal, the Solomons, the Marianas, Leyte Gulf, and Okinawa. Her air groups destroyed over 900 enemy aircraft and sank more than 70 ships, making her a decisive instrument in America's victory. Her influence extended beyond numbers. She demonstrated that the aircraft carrier, not the battleship, would dominate modern naval warfare. Tactics developed aboard her, coordinated strike waves, night operations, and radar-directed defense became standard for future carrier fleets. She showed that a ship could survive repeated attacks and remain a potent offensive force, fundamentally altering naval strategy worldwide. The stories of her crew live on. Memoirs, letters, and oral histories capture the human dimension of her legend. Young men flying into the teeth of death, mechanics repairing engines under fire, gunners who never hesitated despite explosions around them. Enterprise was a machine, but it was also the sum of its people, their courage, endurance, and unyielding spirit. Across the Pacific, in both American and Japanese records, her name became synonymous with resilience. Japanese reports repeatedly referred to her as the Gray Ghost, a ship that refused to die, appearing when least expected and striking with precision. Her survival became a psychological weapon, shaping enemy strategy as much as her aircraft struck physical targets. Even today, the USS Enterprise remains a benchmark for naval excellence. Her legacy shaped carrier design, crew training, and combat doctrine for generations. Ships bearing her name continue to serve, but it is the original CV-6 that embodies the spirit of endurance and determination that defined the Allied victory in the Pacific. The war ended, but her story is timeless. a reminder of what steel, strategy, and human courage can achieve when bound together. And as the smoke of war cleared, the Pacific remembered her not just as a warship, but as a symbol, the ship that refused to die, the heart of a fleet, and the most dangerous American warship of World War II. The USS Enterprise is gone, but her presence still lingers across the vast Pacific she once ruled. She was more than steel and rivets. She was courage, endurance, and innovation incarnate. Every dent, patch, and scar told a story of survival against odds that would have broken lesser ships. In her 3 years of almost uninterrupted combat, Enterprise proved a truth that resonates far beyond naval history. Resilience is as vital as strength. Battles are not always won by numbers or firepower alone. They are won by determination, adaptability, and the human spirit driving every lever, climbing every ladder, and launching every plane. Her story reminds us of the men who served aboard her. Young sailors and pilots facing death daily, bound together by loyalty, duty, and sheer necessity. The Enterprise was their home, their shield, and their battlefield. She took their courage and multiplied it, turning individual bravery into strategic impact. Strategically, she changed the face of naval warfare. The age of the battleship had ended at Midway. The age of the aircraft carrier had begun. Lessons learned aboard her decks shaped the future of the U.S. Navy and modern naval strategy worldwide. Every modern carrier owes a debt to her pioneering operations and the ingenuity of her crew. Yet beyond tactics and technology, her greatest legacy is symbolic. The power of survival under fire, the ability to endure beyond expectation, and the courage to return to battle again and again. Enterprise teaches us that history is not only written by victories, but by perseverance in the face of relentless adversity. The Pacific remains vast, quiet, and unforgiving, yet somewhere in the rhythm of waves and the horizon's endless line, the Enterprise lives on. She sails in memory, in strategy, and in the enduring spirit of those who dare to face the impossible. She was, and always will be, the most dangerous American warship of World War II. Cities.